Welcome to the 344th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Stay tuned for my interview with Paz Ellis, author of the book Plantains and the Seven Plagues, a memoir, half Dominican, half Cuban, and full life. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Paz Ellis, author of the memoir Plantains and the Seven Plagues, a memoir, half Dominican, half Cuban, and full life. Paz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your memoir yet, how would you describe the book?
Well, the book is a memoir in the sense that it's a chunk of my life. It starts from when I'm young. Actually, it starts with the story of my parents, how they met in New York, and my mother being from Dominican Republic, my dad being from Cuba. And it goes up until my mother passed away. And that is when I was inspired, I guess you would say, to write the book. Once my mother passed away, I felt that I needed something. And then this was it. This book was it. It's kind of like a little history story, and also honors my parents and our cultures and just everything about how I grew up and
Great.
what they gave up for us. Mm-hmm.
And so how did your parents meet?
Well, it sounds kind of strange, but my mother was very depressed. She was suicidal. Her younger sister had just passed away, and she was taken away from Dominican Republic by her foster family because they wanted her to go to college and they wanted to get her out of the funk of depression. She had been through a lot and lost two siblings, and losing her sister just kind of put her over. And so her foster sisters dragged her to a club. It was the Roseland Ballroom in New York, and she didn't want to go up the stairs, and they were like, or the entrance, and they were dragging her, pulling her, and at the same time, my father was stepping outside with his cousin that he was there with, and they met at the steps, but she was just mad and didn't pay attention, and so that's how they met. She was angry, sitting there watching her sisters dance, and men would come up to her and ask her to dance, and she was really rude, and she was like, no, thank you, no. And she really didn't know any English except for no. So everything was a no. And then my father asked her to dance, and for some reason she just looked up ready to say no, and she changed her mind and she said yes, and here I am.
So your father was Cuban, and
Yes.
you've said that he longed for his birth country and his family that he was separated from due to communism. How was it growing up with your father?
Oh, wow. My dad, he left Cuba before Castro. He had actually come to the U.S. earlier because he came to buy some farming implements. They had a lot of sections of where they grew tobacco. They had tobacco fields. And then he liked the States, and he went back. And what he started to see and started to notice, he didn't like. So he moved to New York, and I would say it was by 1957, he was already in New York. He told his family over and over, I don't like what's going on. You know, it looks like this is socialism and it's headed for communism. And there was just a lot of things that he had noticed. And they were like, oh, no, we're fine because we're in the country, you know. So all of a sudden, he couldn't see them anymore. It was 23 years before my father saw his family again. He saw his parents. He got them to come and visit. That whole process of getting a special visa from a country that has been closed off to the world was not easy. And so he suffered a lot in the sense that he was angry with Castro. And that's where part of the title of my book comes in, Plagues, because he was always very creative and coming up with different ways that God could strike down Castro, although my father was an atheist, which was really interesting. The seven plagues or anything he could think of. He was just obsessed with being able to return or have his family come live here. And that was my dad's story. He wasn't depressed like my mom was, but he carried that pain and that anger with him, pretty close up until the day he died. Yeah, I mean that pretty much tells my dad's story.
Mm-hmm. And so your mother, as you just referred to, battled depression. Can you talk about your mother and her role in your life as you were growing up?
Oh, absolutely. My mom, she was there was two sides of her. She had this amazing laugh, and she was funny, and she could tell jokes, and she was just the life of the party. Everyone loved her. She was kind and giving, but there was this darkness in her. My sisters and I talk about that in my book, and with friends, always talked about that. It was like there was this cloud over my head, over our heads at home, and even when I was a teenager, I had it. Like I felt it. There was this. She was either she wasn't sick because something came up or because she was so stressed out. She was massively depressed, and at one point, we did have to. She sends her to a group home for a month so that she could get therapy because she was so depressed, and so depression did play a huge part in my life. I had to learn to separate myself a little bit from that, and that wasn't easy. As I got older, in my early 20s, I was closer. I was almost 28, so I was past my mid 20s. I developed multiple sclerosis, or where I was diagnosed with it anyway. And so depression is natural to someone who has autoimmune diseases. It wreaks havoc on your brain. So whether or not you're depressed, you will be, because that's what your nervous system does. It just kind of goes into chaos. So for the first time in my life, I really understood what my mother was fighting. It was something she could not stop. It was something in her brain. It was a chemical imbalance, or it's mental illness, really. But hers, I think, came from experience too, because she had a really difficult childhood.
Sure.
So
where did you grow up physically? Did you grow up in New York City?
I grew up in West New York, New Jersey. It's just across
Sure, I know where
across
it's
the
at.
river. Yeah, it's a little town. At the time, it was full of Cubans, and there were some Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. There was a lot of German and Irish and Italian. So, but when I was little, that I started the school system, which was back in 71, there weren't very many Hispanics, really. So I was one of the first. In my class, the school that I went to, I was probably the first one there. So that was a little interesting because I'm from a mixed relationship. My father's a white Cuban and my mother is dark-skinned Dominican. Not as dark as in Dominican Republic. There's you know how India is, but it goes by skin tone and by where you live and things like that, and that's how they cast themselves. Dominican Republic is very similar. The lighter you are, the more opportunities you'll get. And my mom was dark enough to be considered dark here, or black, or mulata, or whatever. But in Dominican Republic, she was fair. She was pretty fair compared to a lot of her relatives. So I grew up in that, and it was hard at first because not everyone back in the 60s, early 70s, was accepting of a biracial, bicultural relationship. So that was interesting as a little kid because I had no idea that I was different. I didn't know. I really thought that everybody was like me, talked like me, went to had parents that spoke Spanish and were strict. I spoke both languages by the time I went to school because I have an older sister, but it was different, and I wasn't prepared for that.
And what was that experience like for you? I guess that cultural experience of both biracial and bicultural in the 70s?
Well, since I was a kid, it was kind of a shock to me because I didn't understand. I had one teacher in particular that she did not like me, and she literally told me why she didn't like me. Besides the fact that I was left-handed, she forced me to write with my right hand. She would make remarks about, being a stupid, spick or things of that nature. And I was like, oh, what? I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand it. And in their own family, in the beginning, my parents had to deal with things because on his side of the family, they were like, Rolando, what are you doing? Why don't you marry a Cuban girl or, whatever, and someone more like you? And he's like, because I fell in love and I don't care what color she is or what color she isn't. I mean, he loved her. He had been married before. That's where I got my older sister. He had married a Cuban woman and he brought her, helped her get out of Cuba, but it didn't work out. And I'm glad that they have my sister because she was an integral part of my childhood, especially my teenage years when depression did hit me. Because, well, when you're a teenager, your brain just kind of loses it. And my older sister was kind of like my lifesaver in a way. But we had a little town and it was nice. And as I started getting a little older, there was a difference of cultures, and we had New York City right there. So our parents, we would go to the city a lot. And my dad, very intelligent man, and he was an inventor and he liked to dabble in different things and the sciences. So we got to go to the museums a lot and we went fishing a lot. And if there was anything that we could do that was an educational opportunity, somewhere where we could go, we did that. So we took full advantage of things in the city, except for the touristy attractions. Like I never went to the Empire State Building in my whole life right. until I got married and had, met my husband and we went there. So yeah, I mean, my parents had trouble embracing the culture, but my dad was really into learning, and in particular, the American Museum of Natural History. We went there twice a year at least. And I grew up with a household that read a lot. Everybody read a lot in my house. My dad was a complete book nerd. I mean, huge. So was my mom. And he wrote, they were called decimas. It's like Cuban folk music. He would write the lyrics. He would also play the guitar. He self-taught himself pretty much to play anything. He found an accordion on the street the bellows were broken. He went to Chinatown. He got whatever bellows are and he put them in and he fixed it and he played the accordion. He could just do these things. And I think that's where I picked up that love of literature and writing. It was from a really young age. I don't remember when it started. I suppose it started when I started writing.
Right. So you mentioned your father's family was in Cuba. What about your mom's family? Did you have extended family in the greater New York area?
At the time, no. Her only family was in Dominican Republic. And while I was young, really young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, one of her brothers died, another brother, and he died of meningitis. And so she by then had already lost 3 siblings. She has one alive. Well, he's my only surviving uncle on my mother's side.
With no fees or minimums on checking and savings accounts, banking with Capital One is like the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Kind of like choosing Charles Barkley in a pickup game.
We'll take Barkley.
Ha! First pick. Sorry, kids.
Yep, even easier than that. And with our top-rated app, you can bank anytime, anywhere, making Capital One an even easier decision.
Okay, here's the plan. Pass me the ball every time.
This is banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
New consumer accounts only. Approval required. Terms apply. Capital One N.A. member FDIC.
It takes thousands of hours to become an astronaut, right, Nina?
Oh, I'm not an astronaut. I'm a design consultant at the Container Store.
But you explore space.
I help you find space with our Alpha Closet systems.
And you're an expert.
Pretty good at it.
And you use satellites to communicate.
I'm doing more virtual in-home closet designs, but I wouldn't say...
We salute you, astronaut Nina, for helping us find space.
You're welcome.
The Alpha sales bonus is here. Earn up to $500 in credit now through February 7th at the Container Store, where space comes from.
And we had no Dominican family here. So I grew up feeling, really relating a lot to the Cuban side of me, because in West New York, when the factories and like a lot of people were Cuban, and we lived a Cuban, we spoke Cuban, we ate Cuban. I really affiliated myself more as a Cuban because of that. But when my uncle would visit, I would quickly become very proud Dominican because he was too. So, and till this day, I think I still do. But one thing my parents always said was they didn't want us to lose our culture. They wanted us to only speak Spanish at home, which we did, except for when we threw in some Spanglish that my father hated. But my parents, oh my gosh, he hated it. At first, my dad refused to learn English. They eventually did. But my parents wanted us to embrace who we were, not just the Cuban side, and not just educate ourselves with history and what happens in the situation, like when socialism and communism come into a country and what it does to the economy, what it does to the people, but also to know what it is like to appreciate being an American. My parents eventually became citizens, and they were so proud of being Americans. My uncle would kid with my mom and say, hey, you're Dominican too, because she would talk about, after she got her citizenship, she was running around holding this certificate saying, I'm an American, and she was so happy. And my uncle was trying to remind her, you're Dominican. And she was like, no, sir, I am an American. And she did love her country, but she finally really embraced the fact that she was an American too, and that anything they wanted to do, they could do here. They eventually bought a house, and, we went to college, although they didn't want us to go away because that wasn't in our culture. In our culture, you get married and you stay home until you get married. And that was the opposite of what I did.
Yeah.
I went as far away as I could. I went all the way to California the minute that I could apply to school. And, so my parents really taught us to love all facets of who we were. But as a kid, I was really confused a lot of times because I wanted to be like my friends. I wanted to be, I thought they were my friends, but I wanted to be called Jennifer, and I wanted to be, blonde and not speak Spanish. I wanted to just not be noticed. I didn't want to stand out, but I did. And I still do. And that's okay. I mean, I like it now.
Right.
But
what prompted you to write your memoir?
My mother's passing. I wrote, this is my second edition. I wrote the first one pretty much about 6-7 months after my mom died. I had sat down and written her a very angry letter because I was so lost and not dealing with her death. My father's death, we expected. He was sick for 13 years. But my mother's death was very sudden. And she had been sick for a few years, but she wasn't supposed to die. They said she had at least 10 more years, that she was doing good. And all of a sudden, here mom is going to hospice, and I'm, flying to Jersey, and 2 weeks later, my mom is gone. And so I was in shock. I was angry, and I wasn't handling it well, to the point that my sons asked my husband, when is mom going to stop crying? When is mom going to stop being mad? And after I wrote her that letter, I kind of felt a little better. And then I started the next day, I picked up my laptop and I started writing the book. And that just, it was very raw. I had a editor friend edit it. So, it wasn't really edited. This time around it was. And I had to get it out. I knew I had a story to tell. I wanted to immortalize my parents, but more so I wanted my kids to have a history, to have like this little history book. And that horrible, painful experience is what springboarded my authorhood because I had always written, but I never published a book before. I still have books I wrote when I was in my 20s that are just sitting there.
What were you writing in your 20s?
What was I writing? Mostly fiction. I like history. I was a history major. I like a lot of historical fiction, contemporary fiction. I love the classics. Of course, I can't write like a classic author, but those are the things that I wrote about mostly. Now it seems I'm writing things that I'm inspired by, who I love, what I love. My fiction books, the ones that I'm launching right now is called Just Finn. And that was inspired by my brother. Because it's about a young man that has Asperger's syndrome. And my brother's in the spectrum. He just found out a few years ago. And so once I found out, I just started writing that book because there were so many things with my brother that I thought, oh, you know what, this would make a really fun story. And it would help a lot of people realize that just because you have Asperger's doesn't mean you can't be successful. And so I just, someone told me the other day, you should get into fantasy or romance novels because those are genres really make a lot of money and they're really popular. And I was like, no, I have to write something. It has to come from within me. It has to be something that I love and that I could really, really relate to because I want my reader to feel what I feel. I don't want them to just go, oh, okay, this was interesting, but I don't feel anything. I want them to feel something. And that's why I wrote that memoir besides, the reason I started. And actually right now I'm really excited. And I guess I'll tell you is that within a couple of weeks, I'll be launching it in Spanish. So it's with an editor right now and he just texted me this morning that he was done. So I'm really excited about that. And then I have Finn coming out again, the first one. And then I couldn't do it in one book. So the second part of it'll be out in the fall. And I'm excited about that as well because, I've already had people say, oh, my son has autism. He has Asperger. I can't wait to read the second part because I can't believe how much your character grew. And my son, and people just like really relate to it. And so that's what I'm talking about. I love that I can touch someone that way.
So what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels or even memoirs?
You have to, I believe, this is my opinion. I believe you have to be invested emotionally in it. It has to come from the heart. Those are the things that I read. And there's certain ways that people write. Someone asked me the other day about they're writing a memoir and it's taken them like 15 or almost 15 years. And they go through, like they wrote an outline. They have like all this homework that they did. And I do that. I did some research. My only source on my mom's side was my uncle. So I interviewed him and got a lot of names and information and little details that I didn't know from my mother because she never talked about certain things because of, her depression, I assume, or because she was embarrassed. And so you have to prepare yourself. You have to have your facts if you're writing a memoir because you're going to have people's names in there. And if you have some people that are not going to be comfortable with their names out in the real world, then you have to change them. And I did change a couple of names in my book. even my older sister, she didn't want her name out. I don't know why, because she's never done anything to be ashamed of. But she's very private, and so am I. But now everybody knows everything about me. Like I wrote this book, and it's like everybody knows, and it's strange. But when you're writing a memoir, you do have to do your research, and your characters, I think you do need to plot them out in the sense of you have to let people know who this person is and how they're growing in your memoir. Mine was a little different because it was a picture, a snapshot of my childhood, but it was about my parents mostly, which is difficult because they're gone. So then it's like a memoir / biography. They told us a lot of stories, and I had a lot of memories, and thank God I was able to remember a lot of it. So, but writing a memoir is definitely something that you need to look back and do research and have photographs. And if you have letters, even better, to bring to life these people. I even got in touch with that man, my father's friend, that he was at that ballroom with when he met my mother, because I wanted to know what my father's expressions were. I wanted to know what he remembered, things like that. So you need to do your homework. You can't just like blatantly just sit there and just make things up, because then it won't be real. So, but that was my experience with the memoir.
So are there memoirs that you've read that you really enjoyed and that you would recommend?
Oh my goodness, yes. I love memoirs. I think probably one of my favorite memoirs is by Frank McCourt. He wrote Angela's Ashes and Tis. He was a school teacher in New York City, and he wrote about what they went through during the famine in Ireland, and then moving to New York and living in like a ghetto. And it was just wonderful. I absolutely love him. I love any memoir that has been written about the Holocaust, or I read one recently about this woman in South America and her life in Argentina because she would go for tango. And I was surprised that I would even like her. She had asked me for a review, and I was like, I don't think I want to read this. But I loved it because I love to read about history and about people. And so, that was really good. But I think Frank McCourt is probably my absolute favorite, because he puts you there and you feel like you were with them. When his brothers were sick or when they were hungry, like I cried. It's a book that no matter how many times I pick it up and read it, I always feel the same way. And there's so much history in it. It's not just like contemporary story. It's historical, and I love historical fiction, and I love historical memoirs. So I would have to say that Frank McCourt is definitely my favorite memoirist. Absolutely.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your memoir and your novels?
Everywhere. No, I have a website. It's PazEllis.com, PazEllis.com. And I'm on Amazon, I'm on Goodreads, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm forgetting something, but pretty much all of them. All of the social media. I'm trying to work on Pinterest. I just haven't really figured that one out yet. I don't have time for it. It's very, I don't know. We just have to pin a lot of stuff, and I don't.
Exactly.
It's not my thing, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Paz Ellis, author of the memoir Plantains and the Seven Plagues, a memoir, half Dominican, half Cuban, and full life. Her memoir is available now, so go buy a copy. And Paz, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really enjoyed our time.
Great.
Here's 3 great reasons to get the new Samsung Galaxy S21 5G at T-Mobile. 1, it's free for both current and new customers when you trade in an eligible device. 2, T-Mobile's the leader in 5G coverage. So 3, you can unleash 5G speeds in more places with your new phone. Get the new Galaxy S21 free at T-Mobile, the leader in 5G coverage.
Phone via 24 monthly bill credits plus tax. If you cancel credit, stop, and balance on required finance agreement may be due. Contact us. Qualifying credit and consumer plan required. See details at T-Mobile.com.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Is that Shakespeare?
Nope, it's Geico.
Yeah, that's Shakespeare from one of his unpublished works. Oh, it be not for awakening. Nay, giveth thou the berries. For 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
No, it's from Geico, because they help save people money.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but Geico got it from Shakespeare.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.